The Galactic Assembly Hall buzzed with anticipation. Delegates from hundreds of species filled the grand chamber, their shimmering skins, fur, scales, and metallic forms reflecting the vast ceiling lights. In the center, a raised dais stood empty, awaiting the human representatives who, for reasons no one fully understood, had been invited to speak. The air shimmered slightly as the delegation from Earth finally arrived, striding confidently toward the podium. Ambassador Ramirez, wearing a slightly wrinkled suit and an easy grin, adjusted the microphone awkwardly, causing a loud screech that made dozens of alien ears, antennae, and tendrils flinch simultaneously. A hush fell over the room. Ramirez tapped the mic twice more for good measure and leaned in with a conspiratorial smile. "How's everyone doing tonight?" he asked casually. No response. Thousands of alien eyes blinked. Ramirez cleared his throat and continued. "So, a human, a Ilthari, and a Kraken walk into a bar." He began. He paused, expecting a chuckle. The silence was absolute. Ambassador Ramirez shifted slightly, undeterred. "The bartender says, 'Is this some kind of joke?'" He delivered the punchline, leaning back with a proud smirk. Nothing. Not even a twitch. Somewhere in the upper balcony, a Zalari official scribbled something onto a notepad with urgent, frantic strokes. Ramirez blinked. He'd expected at least some reaction. These were supposed to be the galaxy's brightest minds. Maybe they needed warming up. Ramirez cracked his knuckles and launched into another one. "What do you call an alien with 3 eyes, 4 arms, and no sense of humor?" Again, he paused dramatically. "Normal, apparently." He grinned. Silence. An insectoid creature tilted its head sideways, its carapace clicking faintly. Another began whispering in its translator device. The room began to murmur quietly, translators flickering as they tried to process the unexpected communication patterns. Ramirez scratched the back of his head, now slightly worried. "Tough crowd," he muttered into the microphone, eliciting only a ripple of confusion through the assembled delegates. At the back of the hall, an alien sociologist named Verth clicked open a private comlink. "They are utilizing nonsense syntax. Unprovoked auditory disruptions. Possible psychological warfare," he reported to his commander. Meanwhile, Ramirez glanced toward his aide, who shrugged helplessly from the wings. Okay, Ramirez said, raising his hands in mock surrender. "Maybe humor's not your thing. Let's get serious." He straightened, adopting a more formal tone. "Humanity has come to extend a hand of friendship to all galactic peoples. Our mission is peace, cooperation, and mutual respect. Also—" He paused, leaning closer to the mic with a mischievous glint in his eye. "Also memes." The translator devices around the hall collectively hiccuped, struggling to parse the last word. Thousands of delegates exchanged confused glances. Ramirez pulled a small hollow projector from his jacket pocket and tapped a button. Instantly, a 3D projection materialized above him, a cat, wearing a tiny space helmet, floating lazily with the words, "I need space," blinking underneath. Ramirez chuckled. He couldn't help it. The pure absurdity of the situation, combined with the blank, confused stares from the galaxy's most powerful beings, was too much. He laughed. A deep, hearty laugh that echoed through the hall. The delegates froze. To them, the sound was alien, terrifying, unpredictable. Laughter was not a universal concept. It was strange, chaotic, without obvious purpose. An Uarvoth general tightened his grip on his plasma rifle, interpreting the noise as a potential prelude to violence. A soft whimper came from a gelatinous being near the front row. Someone in the rafters started recording, whispering, "The humans are activating some kind of ritual. Prepare countermeasures." Ramirez, wiping a tear from his eye, finally caught his breath and looked around. "Oh man," he said, still chuckling. "You guys are really missing out." He gave a small bow and turned to leave, casually tossing the hollow projector into the air, where it replayed the cat meme in a loop. The Galactic Assembly sat in stunned silence long after he exited the hall. Officials whispered furiously among themselves, struggling to understand the purpose, the meaning, the hidden threat behind the human's display. Some speculated that it was a form of mass psychological destabilization. Others worried it was a coded threat or a show of force beyond comprehension. Across the galaxy, Analysts and scholars pored over the footage, attempting to dissect the strange noises, the seemingly nonsensical visuals, the casual body language. None could make sense of it. No culture had ever weaponized absurdity before. Hours later, in a private conference room deep within the assembly complex, a crisis meeting convened. Holograms flickered to life around a circular table as senior military, diplomatic, and intelligence officials debated furiously. "Is this how they declare war?" one demanded. "Are these memes some sort of pre-invasion signal?" another asked. The meeting quickly descended into chaos as paranoia took hold. Meanwhile, on Earth, Ambassador Ramirez uploaded a simple post to his social feed, "Diplomacy Mission, October 10th. Would meme again." Back on Earth, the viral explosion had already begun. Ramirez's post was trending in over 50 countries, and the clip of the confused alien leaders staring blankly at a floating space cat meme became an instant classic. Memolords, news anchors, and political analysts alike dissected it with the same vigor they usually reserved for wars and elections. Meanwhile, aboard the diplomatic cruiser orbiting the assembly planet, Ramirez and his crew were laughing so hard that a few of them had to sit down and catch their breath. Lieutenant Jenna Marks wheezed as she replayed the footage for the 50th time, focusing on the exact moment when the Uarvoth general's eyes bugged out at the sound of Ramirez's laughter. "We broke them," she gasped between fits of giggles. Captain Reynolds grinned, wiping tears from his eyes. "You realize we probably started an interstellar incident because of a meme, right?" Ramirez just shrugged, still chuckling. "Worth it," he said simply. Unknown to them, the Galactic Assembly was already moving to the next phase of their emergency response. Inside a secure bunker beneath the assembly hall, top xenopsychologists, military tacticians, and cultural anthropologists convened for an unprecedented session. Dr. Vrothel, a noted expert in human behavioral studies, stood before a massive holographic display showing still frames of Ramirez laughing, the floating cat meme, and a looping waveform of human laughter. "We are witnessing a new form of psychological warfare," he declared solemnly. "This laughter, this meme technology, it bypasses rational defenses. It attacks directly at the level of instinct and emotion." A Zalari admiral raised a cautious hand. "But what is its purpose? Why project an image of a domesticated predatory mammal demanding solitude?" Vrothel sighed heavily. "That is the genius of it. It is intentionally nonsensical. It destabilizes logic centers, causing cognitive dissonance. Over time, it can erode the ability to resist foreign cultural influence." There was a collective gasp. An emergency motion was proposed and passed almost instantly. The assembly would attempt to replicate the phenomenon, to defend themselves against this terrifying new human weapon. At a secret training facility on the outskirts of the assembly planet, Task Force Resilience began its mission. Soldiers, diplomats, and intelligence agents from across the galaxy were gathered and shown the human laughter assault footage repeatedly. Their task was simple, but horrifying: learn to understand, replicate, and eventually resist the effects of human laughter and memes. It was not going well. A stern-looking Kraken general stood at the front of a classroom, attempting to laugh. The sound that emerged was a deep, rattling hiss that sent several recruits into defensive stances. A trio of Ilthari scientists tried to produce memes by projecting images of various objects combined with written text. One read, "Consumption of nutrient paste, highly efficient," followed by a picture of a bowl. No one laughed. In fact, several participants looked ill. "You must feel the humor," barked their human cultural liaison, a young, slightly overwhelmed intern named Kevin. "You can't just make logical statements and expect it to be funny." Kevin wiped sweat from his brow as he watched a Zalari intelligence officer attempt humor by showing a graph of planetary resource depletion rates labeled "Epic Fail." The Zalari looked up expectantly, his eyes glittering. Kevin pinched the bridge of his nose and sighed. Meanwhile, in the ship's observation lounge, Ramirez watched news reports from the assembly planet and laughed so hard he nearly fell off the couch. "They're trying to reverse-engineer memes," he said, wiping tears from his eyes. "They're training to laugh. I can't even." His crew gathered around, equally amused, as they watched grainy footage of an official assembly press conference where several high-ranking diplomats attempted to issue formal declarations while also smiling and laughing intermittently. The results were horrifying. Faces twisted unnaturally, mandibles clicked out of sync, Vocal cords produced hideous screeches and growls. Human observers recoiled. Ramirez clutched his stomach, tears streaming down his cheeks. "This is the funniest war we've never officially declared," he gasped. Back in the Assembly's secret facility, morale was crumbling. No matter how hard they tried, the recruits simply could not grasp the sheer absurdity required to produce genuine humor. Their minds, evolved for precision, hierarchy, and tradition, recoiled at randomness and chaos. Worse, exposure to human memes without proper understanding caused a range of psychological effects: confusion, paranoia, existential dread. A small, orange-skinned alien sat in a corner, rocking back and forth while muttering, "I can has cheeseburger," over and over. Instructors were forced to administer emergency psychological stabilization sessions. "We underestimated them," whispered a senior assembly counselor to his assistant. "The humans, they are immune to coherence. They thrive in absurdity. We cannot compete." Meanwhile, Ramirez decided to up the ante. He pulled out his personal device and began uploading a new wave of memes specifically tailored to alien misunderstandings. Cats trying to explain complex physics, dogs wearing tiny suits giving press conferences, a series of absurd Earth facts like cows moo louder in Wisconsin because of altitude differences. His personal favorite was a series of Terran history memes titled "Mistakes Were Made," showing images of ancient Earth conflicts with increasingly ridiculous captions. He hit send, leaned back, and waited. Within minutes, chaos erupted again on the assembly planet. Analysts screamed into comms, generals locked down their sectors, and entire branches of the assembly's intelligence networks went dark trying to make sense of the sudden flood. Ramirez toasted the view from orbit with a can of soda. "To piece through superior nonsense," he said, grinning at the stars. Down on the assembly planet, things were deteriorating faster than anyone had anticipated. Inside the once proud halls of the Cultural Defense Initiative Center, desperate aliens gathered around glowing screens, trying to make sense of the barrage of new human memes. The senior analyst, a four-eyed Solvaxi named Praxer, leaned forward with trembling hands, staring at an image of a rotund dog wearing a crown with the caption, "I am the Senate." His mind, trained for decades to spot threats in military logistics and planetary infrastructure, simply could not comprehend how this was supposed to function as a weapon or a joke. Around him, other analysts were faring no better. A Vulcan general had locked herself in a supply closet, refusing to come out until the flying spaghetti monster was explained to her satisfaction. In another room, an entire division of Ilthari scholars was engaged in heated debate over the political implications of a dancing baby gif. Outside, the streets of the assembly capitol were filled with strange tensions as confused civilians attempted to mimic the strange human displays. Small groups of Zalari and Kraken were seen attempting to perform flash mobs, only to erupt into confused arguments about choreography and purpose halfway through. Inside the command chamber, High Consul Vrexen looked on in horror as his intelligence minister presented the latest memetic counter-analysis report. "We estimate a 58% drop in operational efficiency across assembly military and administrative forces," the minister stated grimly. "Exposure to human nonsense attacks is causing cascading failures in cognitive processing and morale." Vrexen slammed his fist on the table. "Then fight back. Send out our own countermeasures." The minister looked pained. We tried, Consul." He gestured to a nearby screen. A hastily made assembly meme popped up, a picture of a majestic tree labeled "Growth is optimal," with a stern warning underneath, "Proceed with duty or face censure." Silence fell over the chamber. Even Vrexen, furious as he was, could only stare at it, slack-jawed. "This," he said finally, voice trembling, "is not funny." "No, Consul," the minister agreed solemnly. "It is not." Meanwhile, back aboard the Terran diplomatic cruiser, Ramirez and his crew were monitoring the situation with a mixture of pride and disbelief. "They're trying to meme back at us," said Jenna, nearly in tears with laughter as she pointed to the Assembly's latest offering, a graph showing friendship networks spreading with the tagline, "Positive reinforcement increases efficiency." Ramirez howled. "They still don't get it. Memes aren't supposed to make sense. They're supposed to make you feel something, even if it's just confusion and joy." Captain Reynolds folded his arms, grinning. "I don't think they can feel joy about confusion. Their whole civilization is built on hierarchy and clarity. We're basically feeding them poison made of chaos." Ramirez chuckled darkly.
Yeah.
Beautiful, glorious poison. As the assembly flailed, an underground resistance movement began to form, one composed not of soldiers or scholars, but of the young, the rebellious, the curious. In dim corners of the capital's network nodes, alien youths gathered around pirated human data streams, laughing hysterically at Earth videos, sharing forbidden memes, and even creating their own strange, hybrid humor. One particularly bold group of Zalari teens posted an image of a bored-looking Kraken next to a burnt-out starship with a caption, "When you try to invade Earth but they hit you with, 'You okay, bro?'" The meme went viral almost instantly, sweeping through the Assembly's networks like wildfire. Praxer, monitoring the situation in horror, realized the terrifying truth. Humanity wasn't just attacking from without, they were corrupting the Assembly from within. In response, the Assembly Council called an emergency session. Representatives of all member species convened in a vast, circular amphitheater, the mood tense and urgent. High Consul Vrexen took the floor, his voice echoing with desperation. "We must act now before human cultural contamination destroys our society," he thundered. "We propose total severance of contact with humanity until we can purge this infection." Murmurs rippled through the gathered delegates. Some nodded grimly, but others hesitated. Behind their polished facades, a dangerous thought was taking root. What if humanity's chaotic joy was not a weapon, but a gift? A young delegate from the Ilthari stood up, tentatively. "Perhaps," she said carefully, "we should consider whether our rigidity is part of the problem. Perhaps we have lost something essential in our endless striving for order." Gasps of horror and anger echoed across the chamber. Vrexen's face twisted in fury. "Treason," he hissed. "You would doom us all to madness." But others were listening. Seeds of doubt, once planted, were hard to uproot. And humanity, masters of planting wild, uncontrollable seeds of thought, had already ensured their roots would spread deep. Back on Earth, Ramirez leaned back in his chair, sipping his coffee as he watched news feeds from the Assembly planet in real time. Memes were breaking through censorship protocols. Underground comedy clubs were springing up in Assembly cities. A Zalari stand-up comedian delivered a flawless deadpan joke about bureaucratic inefficiency that had the underground audience roaring with laughter. Ramirez grinned to himself. "Looks like we just won the galaxy without firing a shot," he mused. Jenna clinked her coffee cup against his in a mock toast. "To the power of memes," she said. And somewhere, across the stars, the first real laughter from an alien world echoed into the night. The Assembly Council was in chaos. The chamber, once a symbol of galactic order and dignity, now buzzed with confusion and suppressed laughter. Delegates whispered furiously among themselves, occasionally sneaking glances at their personal devices where the latest wave of human memes was still trickling in through pirate streams. High Consul Vrexen, veins bulging at his temples, slammed a ceremonial staff against the floor to regain order, but the damage had been done. The infection of humor, of disorderly joy, had already sunk its hooks into the hearts and minds of too many. On the viewing screen at the front of the hall, a new human image flickered into view, a crudely drawn cartoon of two planets high-fiving each other, one labeled Earth, the other labeled Common Sense. The caption read, "Friendship achieved through excessive confusion." A strangled sound escaped Vrexen's throat. He turned sharply to his intelligence minister. "Trace the source of these incursions. Shut them down immediately." The minister hesitated, visibly sweating, before admitting, "Consul, the signals are decentralized. They come from thousands of minor relays, many of them embedded in civilian networks we no longer fully control." A heavy silence fell over the council. The horrifying realization dawned. They had already lost control of their own people. Meanwhile, down in the capital's lower districts, where security patrols had once moved with mechanical efficiency, strange gatherings were forming. At one such impromptu assembly, a Kraken artist known for his sterile, regulation-approved sculptures was now building a 20-meter-tall laughing statue made of discarded bureaucratic forms and rejected permit applications. Crowds gathered around it, clapping and hooting, many of them wearing makeshift costumes that poked fun at assembly protocols. What had begun as simple confusion was mutating into full-scale cultural rebellion. Symbols of former authority, badges, medals, official seals, were being parroted, turned into jokes, or worn upside down in acts of playful defiance. Inside a hastily repurposed broadcast studio, a group of alien youths worked feverishly to translate and beam out human stand-up routines and absurdist cartoons. Screens everywhere flickered with human comedians delivering rapid-fire punchlines, their expressions exaggerated, their timing immaculate. Even without full understanding of the language, the aliens were laughing, real, helpless laughter. For the first time in living memory, the cold halls of the assembly cities echoed with sounds that weren't rehearsed, approved, or mandated by regulation. Those sounds were messy, raw, unpredictable, and they were beautiful. Back in the Assembly Council, Wrexham tried one last desperate measure. "Deploy the harmonization squads," he ordered, his voice cracking. "Force the return of order. Detain anyone found spreading human contamination." The squads, clad in heavy black armor and wielding sonic compliance batons, swept into the streets. But they were too late. When they attempted to shut down one gathering, the crowd didn't scatter in fear. Instead, they broke into a synchronized dance, a sloppy, chaotic recreation of an ancient human internet meme called Carameldanson. The squad leaders stood frozen, unable to comprehend what was happening, long enough for the dancers to sweep them up in the chaotic movement. Video feeds of armored enforcers clumsily flailing to human dance moves went viral within minutes, eroding what little respect for authority remained. Elsewhere, alien poets who had once composed rigidly structured odes to assembly greatness now found themselves experimenting with something scandalous called free verse. Artists abandoned state-approved aesthetics for bright, jarring splashes of color. Children played games with no clear winners or prescribed outcomes. And everywhere, from the neon-lit slums to the opulent ambassadorial towers, laughter rose and fell like waves on a wild ocean. Humanity had done the impossible. Without ever intending to, they had shown the galaxy that freedom didn't just mean the absence of chains, it meant the ability to laugh, to fail, to be gloriously imperfect. Wrexham stood before the council once more, his carefully composed speech abandoned. His hands trembled as he clutched the edge of the podium. "We must preserve our way of life," he said, voice hoarse. "If we surrender to chaos, we lose everything that makes us strong." But the faces staring back at him weren't the same obedient masks he had known for decades. They were alive now, curious and unpredictable. A small smile quirked at the corner of the ill-thought delegate's mouth. A Volvan ambassador snickered quietly into her sleeve. Even Praxer, the once stoic analyst, struggled to hide the twinkle in his eye. Realizing he had lost, Wrexham let the staff clatter to the floor and slumped into his seat. Around him, the assembly no longer looked like an engine of cold perfection. It looked like something new, something human in its messy, joyful imperfection. News began to pour in from distant sectors, fleets disobeying direct orders to cleanse human settlements, governors refusing to enforce anti-human cultural bans, entire planets voluntarily opening their networks to unrestricted human broadcasts. Humanity wasn't just tolerated, they were celebrated. A week later, on Earth, a special message arrived. It was simple, almost childishly so. It featured the Assembly's official seal drawn over with a comical mustache and a crudely animated smile. Below it were the words, "Thanks for the laughs. Friends." The message was signed by hundreds of Assembly delegates, military officers, artists, and civilians alike. Ramirez read it aloud to the Terran Council. As he finished, a slow grin spread across his face. "Well," he said, raising his coffee mug in a toast, "looks like laughter really is universal." Around him, diplomats and military officers cheered. Humanity had conquered the galaxy, not with weapons or fleets, but with memes, jokes, and the power of unfiltered, glorious imperfection. Months after the collapse of the Assembly's rigid control, the galaxy found itself adjusting to a new normal. Planets once known for their strict observances of protocol were now teeming with spontaneous festivals, public art, and unregulated performances. Entire cities that had previously operated on monotonous schedules ran on unpredictable, joyful chaos. Aliens of every species adopted human expressions, slang, and jokes, often mixing them into their own languages in bizarre but heartfelt ways. On the trade hub of Velkran Station, a bustling marketplace had sprung up, dominated not by the sterile efficiency of previous centuries but by colorful stalls selling handmade goods, wildly experimental foods, and trinkets with intentionally misspelled labels that made everyone who read them chuckle. A towering billboard flashed holographic images of a smiling human giving a thumbs up with the words, "Keep being awesome," emblazoned in 20 different alien dialects. Crowds paused to wave at it, as if it were a beloved friend. Amidst all the vibrant transformation, not everything was perfect. With freedom came mistakes, accidents, and disagreements. Small conflicts flared between groups who interpreted humanity's example differently, some leaning into absolute anarchy while others sought to find balance between freedom and stability. Debates raged on public forums, often punctuated by humor or friendly challenges rather than anger. In one notable incident on the world of Rthana Prime, a group of former Assembly loyalists tried to reimpose old regulations, claiming that too much laughter and unpredictability would lead to civilization's downfall. Instead of armed resistance, they were met with a flash mob of thousands dressed as ancient Terran jesters, who proceeded to regulate the loyalists by covering them in colorful paint and handing them flowers. The moment was streamed live to billions, and the image of a stern-faced regulator dripping in blue and gold paint while holding a daisy became an instant symbol of peaceful rebellion. The change was irreversible now. Humanity's laughter had infected something deep within the galactic spirit, something that decades of control and order had only managed to suppress but never erase. Even former enforcers, those once tasked with ensuring absolute compliance, found new purposes as performers, comedians, and artists. One grizzled veteran, a Drethanian named Zurok, who had once commanded fear across 5 sectors, now traveled with a troupe of alien clowns, using his old uniform in slapstick routines that left audiences roaring with laughter. On Earth, humans watched the unfolding changes with a mixture of pride and disbelief. They had never intended to upend an entire galactic civilization simply by being themselves. In a special address broadcast across human and alien worlds alike, President Alvarez spoke plainly to the new interstellar community. "We didn't mean to scare you," she said, smiling warmly. "We just believed in something you forgot, that life isn't about control. It's about connection. It's about laughing when you fall and helping each other back up. That's the human way. It's messy, it's noisy, and it's beautiful." Her words were met with overwhelming applause across dozens of systems. Cultural exchanges flourished like never before. Alien musicians blended their sounds with human genres like jazz, rock, and hip-hop. Poets from distant star systems collaborated with Terran writers, creating new forms of storytelling that celebrated imperfection and resilience. Interstellar sporting events replaced rigid competitions with games of creativity and humor, where the goal wasn't necessarily to win, but to amaze, surprise, or delight. In one particularly memorable event, a human-led team introduced an alien audience to the chaotic beauty of dodgeball, sparking laughter so loud that seismic monitors registered minor tremors. Meanwhile, scientists and engineers across the galaxy embraced the spirit of experimentation without fear of failure. Without the oppressive need for absolute success, innovation exploded. Breakthroughs in energy, medicine, and travel that had stagnated for centuries suddenly accelerated at an unimaginable pace. Entire generations of aliens grew up idolizing human explorers, artists, and comedians, studying ancient Earth history not as a warning but as a treasure trove of inspiration. Even ancient assembly monuments, once cold and oppressive, were repurposed as museums documenting the Great Laughter Revolution, as it came to be called. Statues of stern-faced rulers were humorously modified to include oversized hats, playful graffiti, or mechanical devices that caused them to tell jokes every hour on the hour. Humanity had changed the stars not through war, domination, or technological superiority, but through something infinitely more powerful: the simple, profound ability to laugh in the face of adversity and to find joy even in the darkest times. One evening, aboard a quiet observation platform orbiting a binary star system, a young alien girl sat beside her human mentor, gazing out at the brilliant swirling lights. She turned to him, her eyes wide with wonder. "Why did you do it?" she asked. "Why share your laughter with us when you could have ruled us?" The human smiled, ruffling her head gently. "Because," he said, "ruling is lonely. Laughing together is living." They sat there for a long time, sharing stories, jokes, and dreams, as the stars wheeled slowly around them in a dance older than memory. In the end, the galaxy didn't just survive the arrival of humanity, it blossomed into something far greater than it had ever been. And somewhere, in the boundless glittering night, a million new jokes were born, waiting to be told.